What's happening, everybody? Welcome into Birds Buzz, a brand new podcast for 97.5 The Fanatic. I am your host, Andrew DiCecco. You can expect a new edition of the podcast every Thursday, should drop around 6 p.m. I am looking forward to bringing you some more Eagles content, giving you game breakdowns, insight, perspective, and what I learn throughout each and every week covering the team on a daily basis. The Eagles are 4-1, and there's a lot of positives to glean from what they've been able to accomplish. They still leave some meat on the bones in some respective categories, which we're going to get into. And if you're listening to this on Thursday, the Eagles play the Giants in just a couple of hours. So I'm not going to necessarily delve into the matchups in this one, because if you listen to it afterwards, it really won't have the same relevance. But I kind of want to take a temperature check of where the team is through the first 5 games of the season. And we'll look at the offense and we'll look at the defense and special teams and figure out what they can do moving forward, what their identity is ultimately going to be, and we'll try to make some sense based off of the information that we have. Offensively, this is a unit that has a star-studded cast. Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley, the offensive line. But they are bottom in the NFL, towards the bottom of the NFL, I should say, in a number of different categories. But they're really effective in the red zone, which is a little bit confounding. In fact, this is a feast or famine offense, and it's staggering the amount of 3-and-outs that they've had. So let's unpack this a little bit, because when I look at this offense in its totality, needless to say, they shouldn't have any issues moving the football. They should be able to compile 27 to 30 points on a given week. But that hasn't been the case through the first 5 games. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I understand that offensive coordinator Kevin Patullo has been under intense scrutiny the first 5 games of the season. He's called only 5 games as a play caller, and he's sort of learning on the job. And I understand that's not what a lot of folks want to hear right now, but that is the truth of the matter. And I've seen some aggressive play calls from Kevin Patullo. I look at the first 3 drives against the Cowboys to start the season where they were all touchdowns. I look at some of what he was able to do against the Chiefs early in that game, parts of the game against the Rams, the Buccaneers game early in that game, the first half. The play design was very creative. They were aggressive. And then you see other times, like halves of certain games like the Rams or the Chiefs, where they seem to be very conservative. They don't necessarily have the ability to finish teams and put them away like you'd like to see them do, like they did last season. And most want to point to the offensive coordinator as a primary reason as to why they aren't fulfilling those expectations. I would say that Kevin Patullo needs to be better. There has to be more creativity in terms of route concepts, play design, all of that. You've seen glimpses of it, so you know that he's capable of doing it. You've seen him be aggressive at multiple times and push the ball down the field, so you know that he's capable of calling those type of plays, but you need to see more consistency. You often hear the word execution uttered from Jalen Hurts after most every game as it pertains to the offense. The offense needs to execute better. They also need to draw up and call for better plays and things like that. But what I would say, you have to look at the offensive line as well, because the offensive line is the engine that makes this prolific offense go. And quite frankly, they haven't been performing to the standard in which they normally do. And there's context that's needed for that, because aside from Jordan Mailata, who I think largely has been fantastic this season, holding it down on the left side, the offensive line, the attrition seems to have caught up with this group to the point where they're not able to generate a lot of push at the point of attack in the run game. Let's take this a step further. Landon Dickerson, back in the summer in the open practice, he had a knee injury. Then before the Dallas game to start the season, he had the back injury. And now it's an ankle injury that's going to keep him out for 1, possibly even 2 weeks. So you're going to see Brett Toth, the 7th-year left guard, start for the Eagles against the Giants. And I think it might serve Landon Dickerson and the Eagles well to sit him down for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even through the bye, allow him to get right so that he's able to come back full strength when they play teams like the Green Bay Packers and the Bills later on the slate there. So Landon's been battling through some things. Cam Jurgens had off-season back surgery, and he's clearly not at full strength. Tyler Steen's new to this group. He played just 316 snaps last season in spot duty. And Lane Johnson had the stinger and the shoulder, and he's clearly working through some things on his own. You would still take this group of offensive line pretty much against any other group, but they were historically great last season, blocking for Saquon Barkley, who in his 2,000-yard campaign, now they're just good. It's sort of, I don't want to say run-of-the-mill, but it's your standard offensive line, a little bit better than that. And in the NFL, when quality offensive line play is hard to find, you take that. But foundationally, the Eagles want to be able to run the football. They want the offensive line to impose their will and throw when needed, because last season that was the recipe for success. But Saquon Barkley hasn't had the season that we were all expecting. 83 carries, 267 yards, 3 touchdowns. He had just 6 carries for 30 yards against the Broncos. And at times it seems like when things aren't there, which he's grown accustomed to seeing in Philadelphia, where he's able to run through those truck-sized holes, it almost feels like he's pressing a little bit. And I think that's fair to say. But without the Eagles being able to implement their foundational approach offensively, which is the running game, it makes them one-dimensional, and they're having to hone in on an area of their offense that the offense isn't built around. When Jalen Hurts going back to the offseason says the offense is going to look like what Jalen Hurts wants it to look like, he's taking full ownership of it. This is his offense. And the Eagles smartly have built it around the quarterback, which is every good team does. Now, there's a lot of factors why the offense has been staggering, why there haven't been consistent games from quarter 1 through quarter 4. I look at how teams are playing the Eagles, because oftentimes you're seeing them look a little bit crisper to start the game, a little bit more synchronized, I should say, in terms of the passing game. And I think a lot of that has to do with you're seeing teams blitz the Eagles. They're being way more aggressive in attacking Jalen Hurts. But to Jalen's credit, he's been among the best in the NFL at handling the blitz this season. But now you're seeing teams coming out of halftime, and all of a sudden he's having to face a lot of zone coverage, a lot of sim pressures, which is where you're showing pressure but you're dropping edge rushers. And it's sort of clouding his vision, and he didn't have a completion in the second half against the Buccaneers. He wasn't quite as clean in the passing department as he was, in the second half of the Denver game. And what you're seeing is an offense that isn't able to sustain it for the entirety of a game. And when you're as talented as this team is, there's questions here. But it's never just one person who is to shoulder the blame. And Kevin Patullo has been one of the pretty much the primary name who often gets his name dragged through the mud, I guess is fair to say, when you look at the offense, because he's the play caller, he's designing it, and a lot was made about the continuity and his rapport with Nick Sirianni as to some of the benefactors of keeping him in-house and elevating him to this role. But I would also say that to blame Kevin Patullo solely would be extremely short-sighted. I just mentioned the offensive line not being able to play to the level that they were last season. I mentioned the route concepts, the play design. That falls on Patullo, but I also look at details and some of the common denominators and some of the inefficiencies that continue to surface. And to expand on that, you look at getting to the line of scrimmage. The Eagles are 32nd in the NFL at getting to the line of scrimmage this year. They were 31st last year under Kellen Moore. A lot of the route concepts that we're talking about now were the same from last season or similar. It was a compressed offense, a lot of horizontal routes. There wasn't a lot of downfield throws. But they were able to atone for that with a dynamic rushing game. And that sort of masked it a little bit. So when the passing game needed to be there, it was there. But now it's a point of emphasis because the running game's not there, and now you're fixating on the passing attack. But another thing about the offensive line, because I think this kind of gets lost in everything, because going into the offseason, a lot was made about Saquon Barkley and how he was going to look health-wise coming off a season in which he touched the ball 482 times. And he looks fine. He looks physically fine. He's able to bounce off tackles. He's being met at the line pretty frequently. He's having to kind of burrow his way for yards. It's tough sledding for him a lot, but I think he looks like the player he was last year. He just hasn't had the big runs. He had a season-long 17-yarder against the Broncos, and then for some reason they opted not to lean on him, especially when they were up 17-3, but that's a story for another day. But I say this because a lot was made about the health of Saquon Barkley and the wear and tear and how that could affect him in 2025, but I don't think enough was made about the toll it takes on the offensive line when you're blocking and you're implementing an offense that they become the focal point. You're leaning and imposing your will against the defensive line. And those push plays on a shortened offseason, I don't know that it's fully appreciated about how much wear and tear and how that affects the offensive line. And late in that season, it affected Landon Dickerson. It affected Cam Jurgens. And there are other players that you could assume were all battling through things. Really, that late in the season, every team's dealing with something. Every player's dealing with something. But right now you're seeing what this offense can't do when the offensive line, which is the engine, I go back to what I said earlier, that fuels this unit. But the passing game with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith has to be better. And I look at Devontae Smith, 30 targets, 25 catches, 272, and a touchdown. A.J. Brown, 36 targets, 19 catches, 194 yards, and a touchdown. Dallas Goedert has been sort of a revelation with 4 touchdowns on his own. He doesn't really find the end zone all that much, but you can see that when the offense needs to get jump-started when they take to the air, he's been a player that Jalen likes to turn to. But when you have players like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, you have to find a way to get them into the game plan earlier. Plain and simple. That falls on the offensive coordinator. You look at the offensive line. That shoulders some of the blame. You look at Jalen Hurts. This is Jalen Hurts' offense. And with that comes responsibility. So he is not absolved in some of the offensive shortcomings. It's a collective. It's never just one person who's responsible for it. But they are too talented, and you've seen it in spurts. They just need to be able to put together a complete game on that side of the ball. But it's so puzzling because we were all expecting, with the continuity with Kevin Patullo, that the offense was kind of going to be humming. But it's not this dynamic, explosive attack, and they're usually plotting their way down the field. There's a ton of 3-and-outs. It's staggering, the amount of 3-and-outs that this offense has. And then they're surprisingly effective in the red zone. When they have to have it, that's where I tend to see the creative play calling and the aggressiveness. And Kevin Patullo sort of is able to show some flair. They've run plays off the push play. They've been one where, well, it was the 2 touchdowns to Dallas Goedert, then the 1 to Saquon Barkley. But there's also been times where explosive plays have been there, and we go back to the execution piece because the Eagles haven't been able to finish the play. The Kansas City game, the first play of the game, Grant Calcaterra is unable to handle a blitzing Jalen Watson off the left side of the formation, and all of a sudden that throws off the timing. And meanwhile, A.J. Brown's at the bottom of the screen and streaking into the end zone, or streaking down the field, which would have been a shot play from about 60 yards. And there's a play against the Denver Broncos, which has been often talked about at this point, where AJ and Jalen weren't able to connect on a deep shot. That would have opened the game, broken the game wide open, 24-3, and we're having a different conversation. But AJ got rerouted, and the timing was off, and it became a topic of conversation. But there are plays like that throughout the season, if you're really looking at it and honing in on it. There's also been a lot of penalties. This is a team in the Philadelphia Eagles who prioritize discipline. They prioritize the details, the fundamentals. Heck, they even meet on Saturdays to go over the officiating crew for that week and go over tendencies, what they like to call, so that they're able to hone in and focus on those areas. So they do all of their due diligence throughout the week, and then on game day, for whatever reason, they're not able to have that restraint. And whether it's an illegal shift, which wiped out a big play down the field to Devontae Smith, or an illegal man down the field, Tyler Steen had that. False start, that was, or no, maybe it was a holding, but it was Brett Toth. He had one. The encroachment from Jalen Carter. This is all over the course of one game. The Eagles were penalized 9 times for 55 yards against the Denver Broncos. The Broncos were penalized 12 times. And going back to the Tampa Bay game, the Eagles were penalized 9 times for 83 yards, or maybe it was 8 for 83. But it's a theme that they have to get cleaned up. So the coordinator, the offensive line, the miscues and lack of discipline, not getting to the line in a timely manner, and quarterback play, because Jalen is involved in this as well, with this being his offense, are some of the reasons why it's taken some time for them to get this right. And until they're able to kind of rectify all of those areas and come together, it's going to kind of look the same. But then you look at the defensive side of the ball, which I think has been a stout unit that has been put in some challenging circumstances this year. When the offense continues to have 3 and outs and they're not able to sustain anything offensively, the defense has to go out there. And for the past 2 weeks, they've had to play north of 70 snaps. 72 against the Bucs, 74 against the Broncos, and that is living on the edge. That is not sustainable. I look at this past Sunday against the Broncos. They held the Broncos to 3 points for much of that game. But the offense was not able to hold up their end of the bargain. And eventually the proverbial dam broke, and the defense wasn't able to pitch shutout after shutout after shutout on those drives. And there was 18 unanswered points surrendered by Vic Fangio's unit late in that game. The Broncos go on to win 21-17. It's easy to lose sight of the defense when you look at the offense and their inability to hold up their end. And the defense, they could make a play or two, but to get off the field. But when you're constantly having to go back out there, it's really unfair and unrealistic to expect them to be able to hold up. And eventually that's just not complimentary football. And eventually those things are going to happen and should be expected. But I think what we're seeing defensively is very encouraging. They are ahead of schedule compared to what many of us, myself included, were expecting going into this season. I thought that it was going to take some time for some of these younger pieces to gel and come together, but that really hasn't been the case. They sort of hit the ground running starting with week 1 against Dallas and have been building on that each and every week. There's young players like Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, second-year players. Quinyon Mitchell has quickly become a premier player at his position and more of a household name than maybe he was last season outside of Philadelphia. He had a tough game against Cortland Sutton, who got him for 6 catches for 81 yards. A lot of that back shoulder stuff was how the Broncos and Sean Payton opted to attack him in the second half of that game. And Quinyon's been a little bit more handsy than he was last season, so you have to wonder if that's going to be a little bit more tightly officiated moving forward. But he largely erases one side of the field and gives Vic Fangio a lot of the luxury of moving him around and allowing him to shadow the opposition's top receiver. Cooper DeJean, who Vic Fangio called a hell of a football player, and he's happy that he has him on his team, it's been sort of a ho-hum performance week to week for him. He plays what I believe to be the toughest position on the defensive side in that nickel corner role where receivers don't have a two-way go. You have to be involved in the run game. You also have to be mindful of what all three levels of the defense are responsible for, and he carries out his assignments to a T. He's arguably the best defensive back, best cornerback, I should say, tackling in the open field. He's made a lot of key tackles to stop some of these teams from creating explosive plays. And I think back to the Chiefs, which are an offense that typically likes to spread defenses out, and the Rams, and Cooper DeJean made a lot of plays in traffic that, frankly, the cornerbacks typically don't make. So those two players have been glue, and there hasn't been any sort of a drop-off in their play compared to or relative to their standout rookie campaigns. Reed Blankenship has been holding it down as the veteran member of that secondary. And Drew Makuba has been growing each and every week. There have been some busting coverage, which Vic Fangio has not shied away from highlighting and keeping Drew Makuba honest. But he's also made some nice plays against the run, and he's had some moments in coverage that are encouraging. He's going to get better the more that he plays and gives the Eagles an intriguing, versatile third-level defender who you can deploy creatively once he's fully immersed into that safety position. He has the ability to play nickel. He's played that in college. And it would once Vic Fangio and the Eagles are comfortable enough, they can deploy him a little bit more creatively and give them some more optionality there. The big question is the second cornerback spot, because going back to training camp, it was Keely Ringo, the third-year corner for the Eagles, and veteran Adoree Jackson that were trading spots with the first team each and every day. And then eventually Keely Ringo gave way for Adoree Jackson, and you saw him start the first 3 weeks of the season. The first week against the Cowboys, Adoree would probably be the first to tell you that it wasn't good enough. He gave himself a C after that game. But he got a lot better against the Chiefs and the following week as well against the Rams. Players like that, you kind of know who they are, and then you often question the upside versus someone like Ringo, who's 23 years old. The Eagles drafted him to be a player that they can develop. They've invested 2 years and some change in developing him. So when Adoree Jackson suffered the groin injury and missed the Buccaneers game, that was Keely Ringo's first opportunity to start. And talking to him throughout the week, you got a very unique perspective because he was able to take a step back, see things through a different lens. It didn't work out in his favor coming out of camp. He didn't win that job. He didn't have a consistent enough camp to put his stamp on a starting job. But instead of sulking, he took his role on special teams very seriously, as he always does. One of the best gunners in the NFL. Wouldn't surprise me if, last season he was on the Pro Bowl ballot, and if he doesn't remain a starter this year, you could make a case for him being on the Pro Bowl ballot as a special teamer again. But he never sulked. He never wavered in his confidence. And he's somebody that will tell you, I want to do whatever it takes for the team to win. And he loves football. He loves getting better. And I think that it speaks a lot that when he was out there against the Bucs, Vic Fangio said he was pretty sticky in man coverage. Those were his words, not mine. Sure, his tackling in the open field left a lot to be desired. There's about 2 or 3 times where he wasn't able to wrap up defenders or wrap up ball carriers, I should say, and that hurt the Eagles. And he wasn't thrown out a ton, which even surprised Keely Ringo. Baker Mayfield instead wanted to test Quinyon Mitchell, but I think that it maybe foreshadows what you can expect to see here from Keely, who started again against the Broncos. Later in that game, Sean Payton was targeting Keely a little bit. He could argue he should have been called for a pass interference penalty just before halftime. Looked like he got a hand on the helmet there. But I give him credit because it's one of the toughest things to do as a corner, have that short memory, good play or bad, get back out there and line it back up. And from being around Keely Ringo for a couple years and covering him, one, he has an immensely high character, but his confidence, regardless, doesn't waver. And those are the hallmarks of a corner that you can work with. And when you have someone who's 6'2", 200 pounds, and has the physicality and the speed, the linear speed, those are tools that you can build off of. So he gave up the 2-point conversion in that game. Not great. Looked like the Broncos. I felt pretty comfortable calling that play to Troy Franklin, and it was a wide throw to the right side of the end zone where he had a step or two on Keely Ringo, and it felt like they were comfortable doing that, knowing that they could get a receiver isolated against Ringo in space. And one of the things that Keely Ringo doesn't do that Adoree Jackson does really well, he's not exactly a fluid mover laterally. He has stiffness in his hips and the ability to stop and start. If you watch the games and you hone in on that, you'll see what I mean if you haven't already. But he has we talk about the prototypical size, the strength, and the mindset to be a player that they can try and grow with. And it seems like, and I'm recording this before the Giants game, Vic Fangio said possibly in terms of could you see Keely Ringo out there as the cornerback 2 again. We'll see. When you have a player that young, it makes sense to continue to grow and invest and pour into that player. I am not 100% certain that cornerback 2 spot is on the Eagles roster right now in the long term, but they have 3 weeks or so ahead of the trade deadline to figure that out. I should also mention that Jacorian Bennett will be on IR till right around that time with the pec injury, so he hasn't had much of an opportunity to put his dent or state his case as to becoming a starter on this team, but he also was with the Eagles in early August. And they, Vic Fangio got plenty of, have seen plenty of reps. So as of right now, it seems like Keely Ringo is the best option there. At linebacker, and I look at the hallmark of this defense, and I go back to what I said before the season, it seems to me like this is going to be a defense that prioritizes, that is predicated on interior pressure and dynamic second-level play. And Jihad Campbell and Zach Baun have been tremendous. Zach Baun, the Eagles are utilizing him a little bit more as a blitzer, and which is interesting, but they're not able to get home with traditional pressure, which last season they didn't have a problem with. But Zach Baun has been someone who's been the heartbeat of that defense, a tone setter, a calming voice. When I asked Keely Ringo after the game, when things aren't going well defensively or there's a little bit of turbulence, who are those calming voices? Who's that calming presence? And he said, Zach Baun and Reed Blankenship. Not a surprise, but Baun also makes plays behind the line of scrimmage. He's good in coverage. He's fluid, moving sideline to sideline. And he's a highly intelligent player who can get after the quarterback as a blitzer as well. Very well-rounded player and complements, ideally, Jihad Campbell. We talked about Drew Makuba developing at a rapid pace. You can make an even larger case for Jihad Campbell because he was well ahead of schedule to start training camp. Now he's going out there, and you're seeing what he can do as an overhang player. You're seeing how he operates in space. The interception he had against the Buccaneers saved the game for the Eagles. And I think it speaks to his mental fortitude or his mental resolve because he got beat on that wheel route with Bucky Irving, goes back into that game, and then makes a play that ends up helping the Eagles win that game. But you want to talk about a fluid mover who's lengthy and can narrow the throwing windows for quarterbacks, and he seems to be more and more comfortable in coverage and dropping. I mean, Jihad Campbell is a big-time player, and it's only a matter of time before he starts to factor in rushing the quarterback and attacking the line of scrimmage in that way. And who knows, with the presumed return of Nakobe Dean, that could be something to keep an eye on. Speaking of Nakobe Dean, what role might he have? Well, I think it's fair to look at it and say he's too talented. He was a 15-game starter last year to not be someone who's factoring in defensively. But that should not be at the expense of Jahad Campbell or Zach Bond. But Jacoby's a very effective run defender. He's also a good blitzer. I think when he is activated, you might see him in there on special teams and then maybe sporadically on defense. But he's certainly going to have a role. And the Eagles have an embarrassment of riches at linebacker. And it's not hyperbole to say that this is the most well-rounded group of linebackers and playmakers at that position that they've had maybe ever in their history. We also have to get into the edge rusher group because I get asked a lot about what am I seeing and are they underperforming? But going into the season, I had that highlighted as a group that I question their depth. And there's a lot of youth and inexperience there because going into it, they had Jalix Hunt, who played 241 snaps for the Eagles last season in the regular season, came on late in the year and showed signs of promise. And there's a lot of optimism, and there still is, about his upside. He's been quiet. Nolan Smith, he's on injured reserve right now, but he was expected to headline that group and did to start the season. He also was held out of the sack column. So no sacks for Jalix Hunt, no sacks for Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith, by the way, he doesn't get enough credit for what he's able to do as a run defender. Very violent, sets the edge with authority, and throws his body around despite only being about 245 pounds. They're going to miss until he comes back, which probably will be after the bye week. They're going to miss what he can bring in terms of that physicality and run defending prowess. But nevertheless, those two edge rushers, 0 sacks. They signed Zadarius Smith, who's 33 years old. The Eagles are his sixth team. He has 1.5 sacks this year, and he's been their best pass rusher. He's played a lot of football, and now he is a starter opposite Jalix Hunt until Nolan Smith returns. Josh Uche, I think, is their most naturally gifted pass rusher. Now, that hasn't shown in the stat sheet, but he's coming on a little bit, and he's somebody that I think brings a lot to the table. It feels like it's only a matter of time before he picks up one, maybe even Thursday night against the Giants. And then Azeez Ojulari was active for the first time this season after being inactive for the first 4 weeks because of the injuries to Smith, who's on injured reserve, and Obo Okoronkwo, who's also on injured reserve. The Eagles were light on numbers, so Ojulari got a chance to play against the Broncos, has a quarterback hit and a tackle for loss, played more snaps than Josh Uche, who had been active for every game this season. So maybe they have something there. He didn't dress because of special teams. He played 66 snaps in his career. That factors in when you're the fifth or sixth edge rusher active on game day. And some players are just better in game situations because Azeez Ojulari, if we're being honest, didn't have a stellar training camp. He wasn't heard from very much compared to someone like Josh Uche, who was. But when the lights came on, he was all over the field, and he now gets a chance to play his former team twice over the next 3 weeks. So I'm not ready to write this edge rusher group off. Vic Fangio said about 2 weeks ago, I believe we have enough there, and if not, Howie Roseman will make an adjustment. We'll add somebody. But he also doubled down on that and seems pretty optimistic about what he's seen. And that's why I always say you can't always look at the box score and search for sacks as a barometer for success for a unit. Pressures carry a lot of weight as well, throwing quarterbacks off their spot and forcing potentially turnovers. So we'll keep an eye on that group. And then we also we'll wrap things up here by talking about Jalen Carter, because Jalen Carter has been dealing with a shoulder injury this season. He had it back in the summer. It's the same shoulder, and it seems like something that could linger throughout the season. You see him grab at it every game. He'll have to go to the sideline occasionally, but he goes back in there. But if you really hone in on what he's doing out there, when he's out there, it's on his mind. He's trying to do things to compensate for that, and that was obvious against the Broncos. But I give him a lot of credit because there are times where you see him still be able to make an impact and generate pressure from the interior. But that injury is something to keep an eye on. And he hasn't necessarily factored into the stat sheet or really had the Jalen Carter game like he did against the Saints last season where he took over. That's likely ahead because he's an immensely talented player and arguably, a top 2 or 3 at his position. But there hasn't been that dominant game. And then you have Moro Ojomo, who has been effective at pushing the pocket from the interior, but not necessarily as a run defender. Byron Young hasn't necessarily made his mark as a run defender, especially against the Broncos. But they have depth there. Jordan Davis has been a revelation this year, playing more snaps than he has in the past. He had the blocked field goal against the Rams that he took to the house to win that game for the Eagles, and he's just being a much more dominant force. He's getting his pad level lower. There's still times where he gets a little high, but he's doing a better job of playing with leverage, and that's hard to do for a player of that size. But that's the synopsis of the defense, and I think they've done a really good job amid some challenging circumstances. And it's up to the offense now to be able to hold up their end, play complementary football, and have this everything start to come together, because this team's too talented for us to not even know what their identity is on the offensive side of the ball. But that's going to do it for this edition of Birds Buzz. I am Andrew DiCecco, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the podcast. And I can't wait to recap what the Eagles were able to do at MetLife Stadium Thursday night, and then we'll do another roundup of everything that I was able to learn at the NovaCare Complex throughout the week, and any press conference takeaways as well. Until next time, Andrew DiCecco signing off. Take care. Hey guys, Andrew DiCecco here. Hope you enjoy Birds Buzz, and be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. And if you liked Birds Buzz, check out our other videos on YouTube on the links right here.